Detective Marcus Williams had always been the golden boy of the family. Star athlete in high school, honor roll student, and now a decorated police officer with the Metro City Police Department. His younger brother Daniel had taken a different path, one that involved years of federal law enforcement training, countless nights studying case files, and climbing the ranks of the FBI with methodical precision. But Marcus didn't know that. Nobody in the family knew exactly what Daniel did for work, only that he traveled frequently and couldn't talk about it much. The brothers had grown up in a working-class neighborhood where respect for law enforcement ran deep. Their father had been a security guard, their uncle a corrections officer. Marcus wore his badge with pride, often posting photos on social media of his patrol car and his latest commendations. Daniel, meanwhile, kept his professional life completely separate from his personal one. When family asked about his job, he'd give vague answers about government work and consulting. The secrecy wasn't born from shame, it was necessity. On this particular Tuesday morning, Daniel was coordinating a multi-agency operation targeting a sophisticated drug trafficking network that had been operating across state lines. Intelligence suggested the operation had corrupt law enforcement officials on its payroll, which made trust a precious commodity. Daniel's team had been working this case for 18 months, and today they were finally moving in for arrests. The operation required coordination with local police departments, but only at the highest levels. Beat cops and detectives weren't supposed to know anything about it until after the arrests were made. Daniel sat in an unmarked sedan 3 blocks from the target location, reviewing final details with his team through encrypted radio communications. Agent Rebecca Torres, his second-in-command, was positioned on the north side of the building. Agent Michael Chen covered the back exit. Daniel would lead the entry team through the front. They'd practiced this scenario dozens of times in training facilities, but real operations always carried unexpected variables. The target was a seemingly legitimate import business that served as a front for cocaine distribution. The owner, Vincent Russo, had connections reaching into City Hall and, according to their intelligence, several police precincts. This wasn't just about drugs. It was about corruption that went deeper than anyone outside the federal investigation realized. Daniel's team had documented payments to at least 3 police officers and 2 city council members. The evidence was solid, but they needed to move carefully to avoid tipping off other compromised officials. As Daniel checked his equipment one final time, he thought about the irony of the situation. His brother Marcus often complained about federal agents swooping into local cases, claiming they didn't understand street-level policing. Marcus had no idea that his younger brother was one of those federal agents he criticized. The family dynamic had become increasingly strained as Daniel's career progressed, and his explanations became more evasive. Their parents worried he was involved in something dangerous or illegal. Marcus suspected Daniel worked for some boring government desk job and was embarrassed about it. Daniel's radio crackled to life. "Alpha Team, we have movement inside the building. Subjects appear to be preparing to leave. We need to move now." He took a deep breath, knowing that once they breached that door, there would be no going back. This operation would either validate months of careful investigation or potentially compromise ongoing cases if something went wrong. The weight of command settled on his shoulders as he gave the signal to begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the industrial district as federal agents moved into position around the import business. Daniel had no way of knowing that his brother Marcus was currently on patrol just 6 blocks away, responding to what he thought was a routine disturbance call. The convergence of their professional lives was about to create a situation that would test everything both brothers believed about duty, family, and justice. Marcus received the dispatch at exactly 9:47 a.m. Unit 47, we have reports of suspicious activity at 1247 Industrial Boulevard. Multiple vehicles, possible drug activity. Approach with caution. He was 3 minutes away from what he assumed would be another routine investigation. Marcus had no idea he was about to walk into the middle of a federal operation that his own brother was leading. The radio crackled again with an update that made his pulse quicken. "Unit 47, be advised we have reports of armed individuals at that location." As Marcus turned onto Industrial Boulevard, he could see several unmarked cars positioned strategically around a large warehouse building. His training kicked in immediately. This looked like either a drug deal in progress or some kind of organized crime activity. He called for backup and approached cautiously, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. Marcus had encountered dangerous situations before, but something about this scene felt different, more organized, more professional. Daniel was in the middle of giving final instructions to his team when one of his agents spotted the patrol car. "Sir, we have local law enforcement approaching from the east. One unit appears to be a routine patrol." Daniel felt his stomach drop. This was exactly what they'd tried to avoid. Local officers stumbling into their operation without proper coordination. "Try to wave him off," Daniel instructed. "We can't have unauthorized personnel compromising this." But Marcus wasn't easily deterred. He parked his patrol car at what he considered a safe distance and began approaching on foot, using parked vehicles for cover. From his perspective, he was investigating potential criminal activity, and these unmarked cars full of armed individuals looked suspicious. He couldn't see the federal identification badges or hear the radio communications that would have immediately clarified the situation. Agent Torres tried to intercept Marcus before he got too close to the primary operation zone. She approached with her badge visible, hopping to quickly explain the situation and get him to withdraw. But Marcus saw a person in civilian clothes approaching him near what appeared to be a crime scene, and his training told him to be cautious of everyone until the situation was clarified. "Police officer," Marcus called out, his hand on his weapon but not yet drawn. "I need everyone to show me their hands and identify themselves." Agent Torres complied, holding up her federal badge, but Marcus was too far away to read it clearly. The morning sun created a glare that made identification difficult, and the stress of what he perceived as a potentially dangerous situation heightened his alertness. Daniel watched this interaction through binoculars from his position and realized with growing concern that the local officer wasn't backing down. Worse, the officer was now moving closer to their primary target building, potentially alerting the suspects inside to law enforcement presence. "Tors, get that officer out of there now," he commanded through his radio. "We cannot have this operation compromised." The situation escalated when Marcus spotted movement inside the warehouse building, shadows passing by windows, what appeared to be people moving quickly around inside. His training and experience told him that people were destroying evidence or preparing to flee. He made a decision that would change everything. He was going to investigate this building, regardless of who these other people were. Marcus keyed his radio to call for additional backup and to report what he was observing. "Dispatch, Unit 47 at 1247 Industrial Boulevard. I have multiple suspicious individuals with possible federal identification, but I cannot confirm. Requesting immediate backup and supervisor response." The dispatch confirmed his request, but backup was at least 8 minutes away. Daniel realized the situation was spiraling out of control. A local police officer was about to compromise months of federal investigation, and there was no way to explain the situation without potentially exposing their operation to the very corruption they were investigating. He made a command decision that would haunt him later. He would personally intervene to prevent the local officer from interfering with their arrest operation. The two brothers were now on a collision course, neither knowing the other's identity, both believing they were upholding justice and protecting the public. Marcus saw federal agents as potential threats to his investigation. Daniel saw a local police officer as a threat to a crucial federal operation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test everything they believed about law enforcement, family loyalty, and the nature of justice itself. Marcus drew his service weapon when he saw someone in tactical gear approaching him directly. From his perspective, this looked like an armed individual moving aggressively toward a police officer. He couldn't see the federal identification clearly, couldn't hear the radio communications explaining the situation, and his training demanded that he protect himself and maintain control of what he perceived as a crime scene. "Stop right there," Marcus commanded, his weapon trained on the approaching figure. "Police officer, show me your hands and get on the ground now." The tactical gear made it impossible for him to recognize his own brother, and Daniel's face was partially obscured by protective equipment and the angle of the morning sun. Daniel found himself staring down the barrel of a police officer's gun, held by someone he was beginning to realize might be his own brother. The voice was familiar, but the situation was so surreal that his mind rejected the possibility. He raised his hand slowly, his own weapon still holstered, trying to de-escalate while protecting his team's operation. "Federal agent," Daniel called out, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "FBI, lower your weapon, officer. You're interfering with a federal operation." He reached slowly for his identification, but Marcus's training kicked in. Never let a potentially dangerous individual reach for anything when you have them at gunpoint. "Don't move," Marcus shouted. "Keep your hands where I can see them. I said get on the ground now." The situation had become a standoff between two law enforcement officers, each following their training, each believing they were in the right, neither yet recognizing the other. Agent Torres and the rest of Daniel's team watched in horror as their operation commander found himself held at gunpoint by a local police officer. They couldn't intervene without escalating the confrontation, but they also couldn't let their leader be detained when time-sensitive arrests needed to be made. The suspects inside the warehouse had certainly heard the commotion by now. Daniel made a calculated decision. He slowly reached for his federal identification badge, moving deliberately to avoid triggering a defensive response from the officer. "I'm reaching for my identification," he announced clearly. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. You need to lower your weapon and step back immediately." Marcus could see the badge now, but his training had taught him that anyone could obtain fake federal identification. Drug dealers and organized crime figures often used fake badges and credentials to avoid arrest. He needed to verify this person's identity through proper channels, which meant detaining him until backup arrived and the situation could be sorted out properly. "I don't care what that badge says," Marcus replied, his weapon still trained on Daniel. "You're going to get on the ground right now, and we're going to wait for my supervisor to sort this out. Drop any weapons you're carrying and assume the position." Daniel realized with growing alarm that his brother, because he was now certain this was Marcus, was about to arrest him in the middle of a crucial federal operation. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. Months of investigation were about to be compromised because his own brother was doing his job too well. The warehouse door suddenly burst open, and several armed individuals emerged, clearly preparing to flee. Daniel's worst fears were realized. The suspects had used this confrontation as cover to begin their escape. "Officer, look behind you," Daniel urgently called out. "Those are the actual suspects. We need to coordinate immediately or they're going to get away." Marcus glanced quickly over his shoulder and saw what appeared to be armed individuals exiting the building. His training kicked in again, multiple threats, unknown number of hostiles, civilian agents of unknown reliability. He keyed his radio while keeping his weapon trained on Daniel. "Dispatch. Unit 47 needs immediate backup. Multiple armed suspects. Federal agents on scene. Situation unclear." The morning that had started as a routine patrol for Marcus and a carefully planned operation for Daniel had devolved into chaos. Both brothers were now facing the most challenging situation of their respective careers, and neither yet knew they were pointing guns at family. Daniel's team sprang into action as the suspects attempted to flee. Agent Torres moved to intercept the primary target, Vincent Rosso, while Agent Chen coordinated with other team members to prevent escape through secondary exits. But the element of surprise was gone, and the suspects were now aware of law enforcement presence. Marcus found himself in an impossible situation. Armed federal agents claiming to be conducting a legitimate operation, armed suspects fleeing from a building, and no clear way to determine who was legitimate and who wasn't. His backup was still minutes away, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Officer, my name is Special Agent Daniel Williams," Daniel called out. Hopping the family name might trigger recognition. "FBI. Those people fleeing the building are federal fugitives. We need to work together right now or they're going to escape." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Williams, his brother's last name. But it couldn't be possible. His brother Daniel worked some boring government job, didn't he? He'd never mentioned being FBI. Marcus's concentration wavered for just a moment as his mind tried to process this information. Daniel saw the recognition in his brother's eyes and knew this was his chance to end the standoff. "Marcus, it's me. It's Danny. Lower your weapon, brother. We've got work to do." The realization crashed over Marcus like a wave. The federal agent he'd been holding at gunpoint, the person he'd been ready to arrest for interfering with his investigation, was his own younger brother. The brother who'd been secretive about his work, who traveled constantly, who couldn't talk about his job. He was FBI. Marcus slowly lowered his weapon, his mind reeling from the revelation. "Danny, what the hell are you doing here? Why didn't you tell me you were FBI?" But there was no time for explanations. The suspects were fleeing. Shots were being fired in the distance, and both brothers had jobs to do. "Explanations later," Daniel said grimly, drawing his own weapon. "Right now, we need to stop those people from getting away. Can you help us? Or do I need to call this in as officer interference with a federal investigation?" Marcus holstered his weapon and keyed his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 47. Cancel that backup request. I'm coordinating with federal agents on scene. We have multiple suspects fleeing 1247 Industrial Boulevard, setting up a perimeter now." The brothers found themselves working together for the first time in their professional lives. Marcus using his knowledge of local streets to help coordinate the pursuit, while Daniel directed the federal operation. It wasn't the family reunion either of them had imagined, but it was effective. Agent Torres had successfully detained Vincent Russo, but two other suspects had managed to reach vehicles and were attempting to flee. Marcus radioed their descriptions and likely escape routes to other patrol units in the area, while Daniel coordinated with FBI aircraft to track their movement from above. "How long have you been FBI?" Marcus asked as they moved to secure the warehouse building. 8 years, Daniel replied. "Started right after college. I wanted to tell you, but you couldn't trust your own brother." The hurt in Marcus's voice was evident. Daniel paused, looking at his brother seriously. "It wasn't about trust, Marcus. It was about security clearances, ongoing investigations, and the fact that we've been investigating corruption in local police departments. I couldn't risk compromising cases or putting you in a position where you might inadvertently compromise something." The words hit Marcus hard. His brother hadn't told him about his career because federal agents had been investigating corrupt cops, and Daniel hadn't known if Marcus could be trusted. The implications were staggering and deeply personal. Within 30 minutes, the situation was under control. Two suspects were in custody. One was still being pursued by local units, and the warehouse had been secured with evidence that would support multiple federal prosecutions. Daniel's team had successfully completed their operation, despite the unexpected complication of his brother's interference. As the immediate crisis subsided, both brothers found themselves standing in the parking lot, surrounded by federal agents and local police officers who were beginning to arrive as backup. The professional situation was resolved, but the personal situation was just beginning. "We need to talk," Marcus said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, we do, but not here and not now. This operation is going to require hours of debriefing and evidence processing." Marcus looked around at the federal agents, the seized evidence, the coordinated operation that his brother had been leading. "All this time, you've been working cases like this, leading operations like this." "Among other things," Daniel replied. "Marcus, I know this is a lot to process, but I need you to understand. Everything you've seen here today is classified. You can't discuss it with anyone, including our parents, until the prosecutions are completed and the information becomes public record." The request stung. Even now, even after Marcus had nearly arrested his own brother and then helped complete a federal operation. Daniel was asking him to keep secrets. The family dynamic that had been strained for years had just become infinitely more complicated. Captain Rodriguez of the Metro City Police Department arrived on scene to assess the situation and coordinate with federal authorities. He was briefed by both Agent Torres and Detective Williams about the morning's events, though the full details of the family relationship weren't disclosed in the official reports. "Detective Williams," Captain Rodriguez said, "I understand you provided valuable assistance to the federal operation. I'll need a full report on your involvement and how you came to be at this location." Marcus glanced at his brother, who gave him a subtle nod indicating that he should tell the truth about responding to a dispatch call. The official story would be that Detective Marcus Williams had responded to a suspicious activity report and had properly coordinated with federal agents once their authority was established. As the scene wound down and evidence was being cataloged, Daniel approached his brother one more time before leaving. "Marcus, I know today raised a lot of questions. Can we meet tomorrow evening, somewhere private where we can actually talk?" Marcus nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "Danny, are you happy with what you do, with keeping all these secrets?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "I'm proud of the work we do. The cases we solve, the people we protect, the corruption we expose, it matters. But the secrecy is hard, especially with family." "Why FBI? Why not just be a cop like Dad always wanted?" "Because federal cases cross jurisdictional lines. Because corruption investigations require independence from local politics. Because someone has to look at the big picture." Daniel paused. "And because I wanted to make a difference in a different way than you do." Marcus understood that, even if he didn't like it. They'd both chosen law enforcement, but they'd chosen different levels and different approaches. The morning's events had shown him that his brother's work was just as dangerous and just as important as his own, even if it operated in shadows. The next evening, the brothers met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, away from anyone who might recognize either of them. It was the first completely honest conversation they'd had in years, and it was long overdue. "I need to know," Marcus began. "How many times have you been investigating cases that intersected with my work, and I just didn't know it?" Daniel had been dreading this question but knew it had to be answered. "3 times that I can think of. The Morrison drug case last year, that was connected to a larger federal investigation. The city council bribery scandal 6 months ago, we were tracking the money flow. And the warehouse thing from yesterday." Marcus felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Cases he'd worked, arrests he'd made, investigations he'd been proud of. His brother had been watching from the shadows, gathering intelligence, possibly even manipulating outcomes. Were you ever investigating me? The question came out more vulnerable than Marcus intended. No, Daniel replied immediately. Never. I've had complete confidence in your integrity since day one. But Marcus, you have to understand, I couldn't tell you about federal investigations just because you're my brother. That's not how it works. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the complexity of their situation. Their professional lives had intersected in ways neither had anticipated, and their personal relationship would never be quite the same. What happens now? Marcus asked finally. Now you know what I do for a living, Daniel replied. You know why I travel, why I can't always explain where I've been or what I'm working on. And you know that sometimes our jobs might intersect again. Marcus nodded slowly. And if they do intersect, then we handle it professionally just like we did yesterday. We're both law enforcement officers. We both want justice. We just approach it from different angles. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering years of misunderstandings, missed family dinners, and awkward explanations. By the end of the evening, both brothers had a better understanding of each other's choices and challenges. As they prepared to leave the diner, Marcus had one final question. Danny, do you think you'll ever be able to have a normal family life? Get married, have kids without all this secrecy? Daniel smiled ruefully. I hope so. The secrecy gets easier to manage as you advance in the bureau. And someday, maybe I'll transition to a role that doesn't require as much undercover work or classified operations. Just don't wait too long, okay? Life's short and family matters. Daniel nodded, understanding that his brother was speaking from experience and genuine concern. I won't wait too long. 3 months later, Daniel was promoted to Assistant Director of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division, a position that came with more administrative responsibilities and fewer undercover operations. The promotion meant he could be more open with his family about his general work, even if specific cases remained classified. At Daniel's promotion ceremony, which was held at FBI headquarters in Washington, Marcus sat in the audience wearing his dress uniform, finally understanding why his brother had been so secretive all these years. Their parents were there too, beaming with pride at their son's achievement, and finally understanding what their younger son had been doing with his life. The brothers' relationship had been fundamentally changed by that morning at the warehouse, but it had been changed for the better. They understood each other's work now, respected each other's choices, and had learned that family loyalty and professional duty didn't have to be in conflict. Captain Rodriguez had recommended Marcus for a commendation for his assistance in the federal operation, though the specific details remained classified. Marcus's career benefited from the recognition of his ability to work effectively with federal agencies, and he eventually became a liaison officer between his police department and various federal task forces. During his acceptance speech for the promotion, Daniel made a point that resonated with everyone in attendance. Law enforcement is a family business. Whether you're talking about the family you're born into or the family you choose through service, we're stronger when we work together, when we trust each other, and when we remember that we're all fighting for the same goals, even if we approach them differently. Marcus smiled from the audience, knowing that his brother was speaking directly to him and to their journey from that morning of mistaken identity and drawn weapons to this moment of mutual respect and understanding. The warehouse operation had been a success by any measure. Suspects arrested, evidence secured, prosecutions pending. But for the Williams brothers, it had been something even more valuable, a chance to finally understand each other and to build a relationship based on honesty rather than secrecy. Their story became something of a legend within their respective agencies, though the family connection wasn't widely known. It served as a reminder that law enforcement officers at all levels are working toward the same goals, and that cooperation and communication are essential for success. Years later, when Daniel had risen to FBI director and Marcus had become chief of police for Metro City, they would look back on that morning as the day their professional lives collided and their personal relationship was finally repaired. It had taken a federal operation, drawn weapons, and a moment of mutual recognition to bring them together, but it had been worth the wait. The warehouse at 1247 Industrial Boulevard was eventually torn down and replaced with a community center. Neither brother ever drove past that intersection without remembering the morning that changed everything between them. The morning when family loyalty and professional duty finally found a way to coexist.